When it comes to my options trading, I love selling naked options. I love selling naked short puts, naked short calls, and naked short strangles. But due to the buying power requirements of these strategies, as well as the directional risk on some of these naked strategies, sometimes you want to reduce your risk a little bit. And one way to reduce your risk is, instead of doing just your standard naked short put, naked short call, or naked short strangle, what you could do is a ratio spread. So, option strategies explained. Today we're talking about the ratio spread. Specifically, we're going to talk about front ratio spreads. So what is a ratio spread? A ratio spread is a strategy that involves buying and selling options of the same type, so all calls or all puts, in varying mathematical ratios. For example, if you sell 2 puts and buy 1 put, that's a 2-to-1 ratio spread. You can think of a ratio as a combination of both long and short options, but in unequal numbers. Now, ratio spreads come in 2 varieties. What we're talking about today is really a front ratio spread. There also is something called a back ratio spread. The front ratio spread is definitely the most common of the two. So a front ratio spread has more short options than long options. And because we're primarily option sellers, right, we want to be trading front ratio spreads. The back ratio spread, on the other hand, it has more long options rather than short options. So typically that's going to be a debit trade. You know, that's a ratio spread that you have to purchase, where the front ratio spread, because it's a short options trade, is a credit trade. You're going to receive a credit for selling the front ratio spread. For me personally, I only use front ratio spreads because I like to sell options rather than buy them. So anytime I talk about a ratio spread, it's always a front ratio spread where there's more short options than long options. So let's talk about the put ratio spread. So this is by far the most common ratio spread that I trade. The put ratio spread, what this is, it's the sale of 2 or more puts at a lower strike and the purchase of fewer puts at a higher strike. The most common ratio is a 2-to-1 put ratio spread. So a 2-to-1 put ratio spread consists of 2 short puts plus 1 long put, and that's what's being displayed here in this little risk profile here at the top of this graph. The risk profile of the short put ratio spread is very similar to that of the Jade Lizard. If you're familiar with the option strategy known as the Jade Lizard, it has a very similar looking risk profile in that it has a body and a tail, but on the Jade Lizard, the body has a plateau. It's flat in the center instead of having this peak, this kind of like church steeple in the center, right? It's more of a tent kind of area. One of the really neat things about the put ratio spread is that there is no risk to the upside as long as you collect a credit for the trade. So make sure you put on the trade correctly, where you're definitely receiving a credit when you trade the put ratio spread. As long as you receive some credit, you have no risk to the upside on the trade. You cannot lose no matter how high the stock goes up. And of course, you make your maximum profit here on the 2 short puts. You see where the tinted area is, the highest point is exactly on top of your 2 short puts. And this risk profile kind of is confusing to a lot of traders, because you imagine that the put ratio spread must be a bullish strategy because you can't lose to the upside. So obviously you think, well, I want the stock to go up, but that's not really where you make most of your money. You actually make most of your money if the stock goes down, but down slightly and slowly. Because if you can get it to finish somewhere in this tinted area, you actually make quite a bit of money. So really think of the put ratio spread more of a neutral to slightly bearish strategy rather than a bullish strategy. When it comes to volatility, ratio spreads in general, you want these to have high IVR, because these front ratio spreads in particular, where you're selling more options rather than buying them because they're primarily a short options trade, you want IVR to be high. You want high volatility, because with high volatility, the bigger the credit you're going to receive on the trade. When it comes to risk versus reward, you know, the risk graph here on the put ratio spread, the reason it looks kind of funny, and this is going to be the same with the call ratio spread, which we'll discuss in a minute, is because you really are combining 2 different option strategies into one trade. You're actually combining one short naked put, which is a bullish strategy, with a put debit spread, which is the other short put plus the long put. This is a put debit spread, which is a bearish strategy. So you actually have a bullish strategy and a bearish strategy combined into this trade, and that's why you have the little funny risk profile where you have the body here and the tail if you're looking at this like it's an animal. But you do need to remember that the short put, which is a bullish strategy, actually has a little bit more weight than the bearish strategy that is the put debit spread. Remember, that's why you can't lose to the upside. It's because the bullish strategy, that short naked put, overwhelms that put debit spread. But that also means that you do have undefined risk to the downside. So that one short naked put is still dangerous. If the stock crashes, you are opened up to undefined risk potentially to the downside. The great thing about the put ratio spread, though, is you do reduce your directional risk a little bit, because by having the put debit spread embedded in this, you actually, again, you do benefit if you get a little bit of a down move. You just can't have too much of a down move. So think of the put debit spread as a way to lower your deltas on a naked put. So that's all it is. If a naked short put is too much of buying power, too much directional risk, too many long deltas, a put ratio spread just takes a little bit off of it. It doesn't take much off of it, but it reduces that directional risk just a little bit. When it comes to max reward on a ratio spread, the max reward is the credit you receive plus the width of the debit spread. So the width of the spread here. And I can actually show you this in action. If I go to my trading platform, of course, I'm using TASTYTRADE as my trading platform. If I go into the options chain, I'm on AMD right now. Let's go into the 56 DTE options chain, and let me just quickly put on a put ratio spread. So I'll buy this put and then I'll sell two of these puts. So my max profit on the trade is going to be the credit that I receive on the trade. You can see my credit is 136 for selling this put ratio spread. What's my max profit? My max profit would be 136 plus the width of the spread. It was a $5 wide spread in this case. So my max profit would be $6.38. It's actually adjusted for a couple of bucks because the markets are open, so these numbers are fluctuating a little bit. Let's take a look at the risk profile on the trade. You can see that if the trade goes higher, if AMD trades higher, my max profit is the credit I receive on the trade of 138. And again, because I received a credit on the trade, I can't lose to the upside. I'm guaranteed to win to the upside as long as AMD does not trade lower. And AMD can trade lower as long as it trades lower slowly. And if it eventually finishes in this tinted area, I stand to make even more than the 138 that I received for credit. I could actually make as much as $638 if AMD finished exactly at the two short puts at expiration. Now that is an extremely unlikely event. For one thing, I'm not going to be in the trade all the way to expiration anyway, so I'm not trying to make the max profit of 638, right? What I'm trying to do is definitely get the credit I received in this area, but if it goes down a little bit, I do have some protection, enough protection that I could actually make a little more money, a little extra money if it finishes in this area slowly. And because we have this embedded put debit spread here, you know, one of the short puts plus the long put is a bearish trade, we have some downside protection because AMD in this case can trade below 115 and I'm still good because my break even on the trade is all the way down here till 108.50 is my break even. So I could actually have AMD trade $7 to $8 below my two short puts here and I'm still fine. I would still break even on the trade. It's not until AMD trades below about 108 that I really start to lose money on the trade. And again, it's because we have downside protection with the put ratio spread, or the put debit spread that's a part of the put ratio spread. We don't have that kind of downside protection if I just sell a single naked put. If I go back to the analysis, you can see I'll receive 241 credit on the trade, so I receive a bigger credit, but I don't have as much protection to the downside. Now my break even on the downside is only at 112.50. So I had an extra $4 of downside protection on the ratio spread. So that is the difference. That is why you might choose a ratio spread rather than a naked put. So that's the put ratio spread. Let's talk about the call ratio spread. The call ratio spread is essentially just like the put ratio spread, except it's in reverse. So the short call ratio spread is the sale of two or more calls at a higher strike and the purchase of fewer calls at a lower strike. So typically, again, this is done in a 2-to-1 ratio. So the 2-to-1 call ratio spread consists of 2 short calls and 1 long call. The risk profile on the short call ratio spread is similar to a reverse jade lizard. So it has the tail over here and the body over here. By the way, this tail area, you do not have any risk to the downside on a call ratio spread as long as you, once again, receive a credit for the trade. As long as you sell the ratio spread for a credit, you cannot lose to the downside. But you do have some risk to the upside because the call ratio spread does consist of 1 naked short call, and that exposes you to unlimited risk to the upside. The call ratio spread is, again, it's a combination trade where you have 1 short naked call, which is a bearish strategy, in combination with a call debit spread, which is a bullish strategy. And because these kind of offset each other, this does reduce your risk a little bit. Compared to just 1 short naked call, the call ratio spread does add a little upside protection. So let me show you the call ratio spread in action. Let's go ahead and put on a call ratio spread. Once again, we'll choose AMD for the underlying, and let's sell a call and buy a call. Let's do this at a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to sell 2 of the 165 calls. I'm going to buy the 160 call. Once again, I'm going to receive a credit. I'm going to receive a 245 credit for this trade. So what is my max profit? Well, the 245 credit plus the width of the spread, $5, is 745 max profit. Once again, if we want to see our risk profile here, let me go ahead and let's zoom out a little bit. I zoomed way out. There we go. So there is the risk profile. And with the call ratio spread, I can't lose to the downside as long as AMD trades lower. I'm going to make potentially 247 credit, down here in the tail area. But if I finish in the tinted area, I could make considerably more. But again, I need AMD not to rise too fast. I need it to rise slowly over time. And if it can land somewhere in this tinted area, I could make a little bit more than that 250 credit that I received for selling the ratio spread. And again, because this is a combination of a short call and a call debit spread, the call debit spread protects me a little bit to the upside because AMD can trade above my 165 calls as long as it doesn't trade too far above them, but it can trade all the way to 172.5, and that would be my break even. So I don't actually start losing money until it trades above 172.5, which is a full $7.50 above my short strikes. So that is the beauty, once again, of the ratio spread. Compared to naked options, it protects you a little bit should the trade start going against you. Now, one other strategy we do need to briefly talk about is the double ratio spread. What is the double ratio spread? Well, that's the combination of the short put ratio spread and the short call ratio spread. And some people call this the Batman trade. And the reason is the risk profile. It kind of looks like a strangle, except on each end you have a couple of bat ears poking out. So it kind of looks like the Batman logo. So think of the put ratio spread as a way to reduce risk. Instead of just doing a short put, do a put ratio spread to reduce your risk just a little bit. The call ratio spread, think of that as an alternative to a naked short call, again, to reduce your risk just a little bit. And the double ratio spread, think of this as a way to reduce your risk on a strangle just a little bit, right? Because you have a little bit of a protection both to the upside and the downside, again, due to these embedded debit spreads. The double ratio spread has unlimited risk both to the upside and the downside. Even though you do have a little bit protection because of those debit spreads, you can't have the trade go too far against you. Otherwise, you are exposed to potentially unlimited losses. So let me show you the double ratio spread, aka the Batman. Let me go to a different underlying. Let's go to Coinbase. I'll go to the 56 DTE cycle and let me sell a normal kind of strangle. I'll do like a 16 delta strangle. So let's sell these short options, and then to protect ourselves a little bit, let's go ahead and buy an option. I'll do $5 wide spreads. Actually, I don't have $5 wides on this end. I only have $10 wides. So just to make it symmetrical, I'll do $10 wide wings on each side. And then I need to actually make sure that I double up the short puts. And now I've got 2 to 1, and on this side 2 to 1. You can see I'm going to receive a credit of $9.57. What's my max profit? Well, once again, it's the credit plus the width of the spread, and since we did $10 wide wings here, so $9.57 plus $10 is $19.57 is the max profit. If I go to the analysis tool here, you can see, let me zoom out a little bit so it's not quite as scrunched up. You can see as long as we finish, in the middle, kind of like a strangle, I'm going to make my $9.57 potentially max profit in the center area. But if I can get it to move slowly to one of the wings, I can actually make as much as $19.57 if I finish at the very top of one of the tinted areas, which again is a very unlikely event. That's not an event you really should be playing for. Ideally, I'd really just want it to finish here in between all of these strikes. For me, I don't think these tinted areas are something you really want to play for. Again, this is just a consequence of having the put debit spread and the call debit spread, which really are there, in my opinion, to protect you a little bit to the downside and to the upside. It offers you a little extra protection. Yes, on the risk profile, you do have these tinted areas, but again, it's not something you really can play for, and it's such an unlikely event that you're ever going to receive that max profit anyway. So again, that's not something you really should be striving for. So let's do a quick recap on what we've learned about ratio spreads so far, and that includes the put ratio spread, the call ratio spread, and the double ratio spread. So when selling ratio spreads, you want the underlying stock to have high IVR, because when we're selling options, we want our premiums to be richer. So you want high IVR before you put on a ratio spread. Also, as long as you collect a credit on a put ratio spread or a call ratio spread, as long as you collect a credit, you're not going to have any risk to the upside or the downside, depending on whether you're doing put ratio spreads or call ratio spreads. For time in the trade, I like the 45-21 DTE rule here. So I like putting these on around 45 DTE, maybe as far out as 60 DTE, and I like taking them off at 21 DTE. For me, I trade put ratio spreads all the time. Call ratio spreads are something I trade very little of, and the reason is the put ratio spread tends to be a more popular strategy the same way short puts are more popular than short calls. It's because there's just too much risk when it comes to naked call strategies, and because the call ratio spread has a naked call component, a lot of people are scared of call ratio spreads. The other reason I like putting on put ratio spreads more than call ratio spreads is because I like playing the wheel, and if you're running the wheel on a stock, the put ratio spread is a perfect way to actually start the wheel. Instead of selling a put to start the wheel, sell a put ratio spread. Managing a put ratio spread is actually very easy if you're planning on accepting assignment, because all you have to worry about is the one naked short put, because the put debit spread actually wins in this scenario, because if the underlying stock goes against you, the put debit spread, it's going to be a winner. You take it off for a winner, you leave the one naked short put still on, and if it gets assigned, it gets assigned, you take your shares, and that's it. So there you have it, a quick and cursory look at the ratio spread. Now the ratio spread, very cool strategy, especially those put ratio spreads, because they're a fantastic way to start the wheel. And I wrote a book about the wheel strategy called the Super Wheel Option Strategy, and I call it the Super Wheel Strategy is because I like to start my wheel sometimes other than just selling a plain Jane naked put. One of the ways I like to start the wheel in that book is with put ratio spreads. So if you want to learn more about the put ratio spread and the wheel strategy in general, check out my book, The Super Wheel Option Strategy. You'll find a link to the book in the description below. Peace, guys.